Welcome. Today, we're getting right to the heart of one of the most polarizing figures in all of history.
He certainly is.
We're setting out on a very extensive examination of the life, the rise, and the, frankly, staggering influence of the man who redrew the map of Europe in just 2 decades, Napoleon Bonaparte.
From general to first consul and then, of course, emperor.
Exactly.
That's right. And to really get a handle on Napoleon I, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of his story. We're going to be sifting through some very detailed historical sources today, tracing his life from his birth in Corsica in 1769 all the way to his death in exile on Saint Helena.
And our goal in this discussion is to pull out those critical moments, isn't it? The key campaigns, the huge administrative reforms that really define what we call the Napoleonic legacy.
Precisely.
And it is such a complicated story. The sources just reveal a man who is, well, riddled with contradiction.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about the same person who created this rational, modern legal framework, the Napoleonic Code, which promoted equality before the law. But then that same man imposed strict censorship and most damningly reintroduced slavery in the French colonies.
After the revolution had abolished it.
Yes. So it's essential for you, the listener, that we try to present all of these contradictory sides clearly so we can get a real sense of his impact.
Indeed. We'll follow the whole thread of his life, starting with his, relatively humble but very ambitious beginnings. We'll look at that meteoric military career, his time in power, the sweep of his dominance, and then, of course, the blunders that brought it all down.
So let's start at the beginning. Let's ground ourselves in his origins. The man who became this emperor was born Napoleone Bonaparte, August 15, 1769, in Ajaccio, Corsica.
And his family had deep Italian roots.
Right. Tuscan and Lombard ancestry. And the timing of his birth is it's so critical. It was just 1 year after Genoa ceded Corsica to France.
So that made him technically French, but culturally, he was very much an outsider.
And that background really shaped his psychology, didn't it?
It profoundly shaped him. The sources really emphasize his mother, Letizia, whose firm discipline was seen as the dominant influence on him as a child. He was described as fiery, rambunctious.
And he later credited her with kind of reining him in.
He did. But the move to mainland France, that was tough. In 1779, he moves there. He's 9. And his mother tongues are Corsican and Italian.
So French was the second language, and he had an accent.
A very thick accent. And when he got to the military academy at Braine-le-Château, he was bullied for it. Bullied for his birthplace, his accent.
Which I imagine would make someone turn inward.
It did. He became quite reserved, focused all that energy on reading on history, which in the long run gave him huge intellectual advantage.
And his academic talents were clear, even then.
Oh, undeniable. He excelled in mathematics, history, geography, which led him to train as an artillery officer, a field that relies so heavily on calculation.
And he got into the prestigious École Militaire in Paris.
He did, in 1784. And when his father died a year later, he had to accelerate his studies, completing a 2-year course in just 1.
He was the first Corsican to ever graduate from there.
Which just shows you the drive and ambition that was there from the very beginning, even before the revolution really kicked off.
And the French Revolution in 1789 was the perfect chaotic environment for someone like him.
It really was. He initially went back to Corsica, had these strong nationalist sympathies.
But he eventually broke with the Corsican leader, Pasquale Paoli.
He did. He realized his future was with the revolutionary regime in France, with the Jacobins. And that forced his entire family to flee the island and settle on the mainland in 93.
Which leads directly to his first big break, the Siege of Toulon.
Yes, September 1793. Toulon was a critical port, and it was occupied by British and Spanish forces. Napoleon gets appointed artillery commander.
And he immediately shows a different way of thinking about warfare.
Completely different. Instead of a typical long siege, he proposes this daring plan to capture one specific hill fort that dominated the harbor.
Fort La Guillette.
That's the one. Capturing it allowed French guns to just rain fire down onto the Allied ships.
Forcing them to evacuate.
Immediately. It was a tactical masterstroke.
And that launched his career. It brought him to the attention of powerful people, got him promoted to brigadier general.
But then, of course, politics gets in the way. The Jacobins fall from power, and his career is suddenly in jeopardy.
Until October 1795. The next great opportunity.
Right. A royalist rebellion against a national convention in Paris. The government leader, Paul Barras, needed someone ruthless and effective to put it down.
And he calls on the young Napoleon.
He does. And Napoleon understands urban warfare. He orders an officer, Joachim Murat, to go seize cannons from the suburbs.
He deploys them, and as the royalists advance, he orders them to fire, but not cannonballs.
No, not cannonballs. He ordered them to fire canister rounds.
So for anyone listening, can you explain what that is?
Well, it's essentially a tin can packed with iron or lead balls. When you fire it, the can disintegrates, and the cannon basically becomes a giant shotgun.
Spraying shrapnel, utterly devastating at close range.
It was this whiff of grape shot, as it was called. It was merciless. Hundreds were killed. The uprising was crushed instantly.
And that secured him the patronage of the Directory, the new government.
Yeah, exactly. He's promoted to commander of the Army of the Interior, and this is also when he starts styling himself Napoleon Bonaparte, dropping the Italian spelling.
Just before his marriage to Josephine de Beauharnais.
Just weeks before, a very significant period.
Which brings us straight to the First Italian Campaign, 1796 to 97.
Yes. He takes command of this demoralized, poorly supplied army, and just 2 days after marrying Josephine, launches this lightning offensive against the Austrians.
And the speed of it just redefined European warfare.
It really did. He scored this stunning series of victories, Castiglione, Arcole, and then the absolute collapse of the Austrian army at Rivoli.
At Rivoli alone, the Austrians lost something like 43% of their men. Killed, wounded, or captured.
The numbers are staggering. Over the whole campaign, the French fought 67 actions, won 18 major battles, and captured 150,000 prisoners.
But it wasn't just about military glory. He was also extracting huge amounts of money from Italy.
Massive amounts. An estimated 45 million French pounds, plus jewels, art, precious metals, all shipped back to France.
So he returns to Paris, a national hero, but also independently wealthy and with an army loyal to him.
And that was the problem for the Directory. He was now more powerful than the government he was supposed to be serving.
And the critics immediately saw where this was heading. They feared a military dictatorship.
Yes, so facing this reality that Napoleon was just too popular to keep in Paris, the Directory agreed to his plan for an expedition to Egypt in 1798.
The military goal was to undermine Britain's trade routes to India.
But the political goal really was to get him out of the way, keep him busy, and far, far away from Paris.
And what's so fascinating about that expedition is that it wasn't just military. He brought scientists with him.
He did. 167 of them. Engineers, mathematicians. It was a classic Enlightenment endeavor, and it led to incredible discoveries, most famously the Rosetta Stone.
Invaluable for understanding ancient Egypt. But the military side of the campaign, that was a disaster.
A tactical disaster. Horatio Nelson and the Royal Navy destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile.
Which cut off Napoleon's supply lines and trapped his army there.
Right. And on land, the campaign was just marked by extreme violence. When he moved into Syria at the assault on Jaffa in 1799.
Yes, the sources detail a horrific incident there.
He ordered the execution of between 1,500 and 5,000 Turkish prisoners. It was a cold, calculated act of terror that appalled even some of his own officers.
And we really must pause to reflect on the immense human cost of acts like that. It was just brutal.
It was.
Yeah.
And after that, his army was ravaged by bubonic plague. He failed to capture Acre. Yet despite all these failures, he abandoned his army, slipped past the British blockade, and returned to France.
And was still welcomed as a hero.
He was. The Directory was so weak and bankrupt, they couldn't even think about charging him with desertion.
And he used that weakness. This was the opening for the 18 Brumaire coup in November 1799.
Exactly. He allied himself with key figures like Sieyès and Talleyrand, and they orchestrated the overthrow of the Directory.
Using soldiers, grenadiers with bayonets to intimidate the legislature.
They did. And they forced them to dissolve the Directory and install a new government with Bonaparte as first consul.
And under the new constitution, all real power was concentrated in his hands. The other two consuls were just advisors.
He effectively dictated everything. And though the constitution was put to a public vote, the official result, 3 million yes votes, was faked.
Inflated by his brother Lucien to create this illusion of popular support.
A very sophisticated piece of political manipulation.
So with control at home secured, he needed a big military win to cement his position.
He did. So in May 1800, he leads his army across the Alps to surprise the Austrians in Italy.
Which leads to the Battle of Marengo.
A battle that was almost a complete disaster for the French. They were on the verge of defeat.
Until the timely arrival of General Desaix.
Exactly. Who reversed the tide and secured a decisive victory. This kicked the Austrians out of northern Italy and really bolstered Napoleon's authority back home.
This period also saw some attempts at peace and reconciliation.
It did. The Treaty of Amiens with Britain in 1802 brought a temporary peace. And domestically, he navigated the very sensitive religious issue with the Concordat of 1801.
With Pope Pius VII, this was a huge deal.
A very big deal. It had the Pope recognize Napoleon's regime, and it confirmed that all the church lands seized during the Revolution would remain with the state.
So, a major step towards national reconciliation.
And capitalizing on all this, in 1802, a second vote made him consul for life.
And then in 1803, he makes that massive strategic decision to sell the Louisiana Territory to the United States.
For $15 million. He feared he couldn't defend it from Britain, and it effectively doubled the size of the U.S.
But this era of the consulate is so deeply defined by this duality on civil rights.
It really is. On the one hand, he's continuing the work of the Revolution, abolishing feudalism, emancipating Jews and Protestants.
But on the other hand,
A profound betrayal. In May 1802, he reinstated slavery in French colonies like Guadeloupe.
an institution the Revolution had abolished.
He did. He also banned black people from entering France and launched that failed expedition to retake Haiti, which was decimated by disease.
So it's this mixture of progressive reform and outright repression.
A very critical stain on his legacy.
And given that trajectory, the return to a monarchy seemed inevitable.
Following a royalist assassination plot in 1804, his supporters argued that only a hereditary regime could guarantee security.
And so on May 18, 1804, Napoleon was proclaimed Emperor of the French.
The transformation was capped by that grand coronation at Notre Dame in December.
In a moment just dripping with symbolism, in the presence of the Pope, he crowned himself.
He did, signaling that his authority came from himself, not from the church. Then he crowned Josephine. He was now Napoleon I, completely blurring the line between revolutionary leader and absolute monarch.
And once he was crowned, the scale of war just explodes. The peace with Britain breaks down, and the Third Coalition is formed against France in 1805.
And Napoleon's great weapon is the Grande Armée. At its peak, this was a force of up to 350,000 men.
And it operated on a revolutionary principle, didn't it? Meritocracy.
Absolutely. Unlike the aristocratic armies he was facing, Napoleon promoted officers based purely on ability. That created incredible loyalty and tactical flexibility.
And the Ulm campaign is a perfect example of this.
A perfect example. Through rapid, coordinated marching, the Grande Armée just completely surrounded and captured an Austrian army of 60,000 men with barely a fight.
But that incredible land victory was immediately followed by a disaster at sea.
A catastrophic defeat. Just a few weeks later, in October 1805, Nelson's Royal Navy annihilates the French and Spanish fleets at the Battle of Trafalgar.
Which meant his dream of invading Britain was over. For good.
For good. British naval supremacy was secured for a century.
But his focus remained on the continent. And in December 1805, he gets his masterpiece, the Battle of Austerlitz.
The Battle of the Three Emperors. Just a work of tactical genius against the combined Russian and Austrian armies.
He deliberately made his right flank look weak, didn't he, to lure them in?
He did. He invited them to attack what they thought was a vulnerable position. And as they descended from the high ground, the Pratzen Heights,
He springs the trap.
unleashes his hidden reserves, recaptures the heights, and splits the Allied army in two. It was a definitive victory that shattered the coalition and led to the end of the Holy Roman Empire.
He called it the finest of all I have fought.
And he was right. After that, he moves to consolidate power, creating the Confederation of the Rhine, installing his brother Joseph as King of Naples, his brother Louis as King of Holland.
This expansion triggers the Fourth Coalition in 1806.
And Prussia makes the fatal mistake of declaring war before its Russian allies were ready. The result was devastating.
The twin battles of Jena and Auerstedt,
He crushed the Prussians. Then he defeated the Russians at Friedland.
which led to the treaties of Tilsit in 1807, the absolute peak of his power.
He met Tsar Alexander on a raft in the middle of a river. And while Russia got off lightly, Prussia was treated with shocking harshness, losing half its territory.
A strategic blunder, really. It guaranteed lasting resentment.
It did, but his main goal was still to defeat Britain. And to do that, he instituted the Continental System,
A huge trade embargo across all of Europe.
which was the direct cause of his next and perhaps most draining mistake, the Peninsular War.
Starting in 1808, to enforce the blockade against Portugal, he invades Spain.
And makes his brother Joseph the King of Spain, which immediately ignites this fierce popular resistance.
And this wasn't a conventional war. This was guerrilla warfare.
The term guerrilla little war comes from this conflict. It was brutal, marked by atrocities on both sides, and it tied up around 300,000 French troops for 6 miserable years.
A constant drain. Napoleon himself later said that unlucky war ruined me.
It did, and at the same time, his relationship with Russia was falling apart.
Over various issues. Annexations, his marriage to an Austrian princess instead of a Russian one.
Right, and so in late 1811, he starts planning the ultimate gamble, the invasion of Russia.
The scale of that invading army was just immense. 450,000 frontline troops crossing the Niemen River in June 1812.
But the Russian strategy was devastatingly effective. They just kept retreating, adopting a scorched earth policy.
Burning everything as they went.
Everything. Crops, supplies. The Napoleonic army was designed to live off the land, and that became impossible. Starvation, disease. It set in almost immediately.
The only major battle was at Borodino, outside Moscow.
One of the bloodiest single days of battle in European history. The French won the field, but the Russian army wasn't destroyed.
And Napoleon enters a deserted, burning Moscow. The Tsar refuses to negotiate.
And after 6 weeks, with winter coming on, he has no choice but to retreat.
And that retreat was one of the greatest military catastrophes in history.
The army was already weak, then it was hit by the intense cold, temperatures dropping to -40°C. They were harassed by Cossacks the whole way.
The crossing of the Berezina River was just a desperate fight for survival.
It was. The Grand Army was annihilated. Of the nearly 500,000 who went in, only about 75,000 staggered back out. The invasion cost 1 million lives on both sides, and it was the beginning of the end.
And following that disaster in Russia, the Allied powers formed the War of the Sixth Coalition.
You see, he's weakened. And even though Napoleon miraculously raises a new army of 200,000,
The coalition of Russia, Sweden, Prussia, Britain, and now Austria just had an overwhelming advantage.
it all came to a head at the Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, the Battle of the Nations.
The largest battle of the entire Napoleonic Wars, over 600,000 troops.
And it was a decisive coalition victory. The French were forced to retreat back to the Rhine, suffering horrific losses.
The Allies then invaded France itself in early 1814, and Paris fell on March 31st.
Which forced the inevitable. Faced with the defection of his own marshals, Napoleon was persuaded to abdicate unconditionally on April 6th.
His farewell to the Old Guard at Fontainebleau is such a famous, poignant moment.
It is. And that night, he actually attempted suicide with a poison he'd carried since the retreat from Russia.
But the poison had lost its potency. He survived.
He did, and he was then exiled as sovereign to the small island of Elba, off the coast of Italy.
Where he spent 10 months trying to implement his usual administrative reforms, but he was constrained by a lack of funds.
Right, and this was never going to be a permanent solution. He heard rumors the Allies planned to move him somewhere far more remote, and the new king, Louis VIII, was unpopular. So he took a gamble.
An incredible gamble. He escaped Elba in February 1815 with about 1,000 men.
And he marched toward Paris, gathering support all the way. The most iconic moment is when Marshal Ney, who'd promised to bring him back in a cage,
Defects and joins him with his entire army.
Exactly. Louis VIII flees, and Napoleon enters Paris, beginning the 100 Days,
The coalition immediately responds, forming the Seventh Coalition to crush him.
which leads to the final showdown at Waterloo in Belgium, June 18, 1815.
Wellington's army held on just long enough.
They did. They withstood repeated French assaults until the crucial arrival of Blücher's Prussians on Napoleon's right flank.
And that was it. The final, devastating defeat.
He returned to Paris, realized his position was hopeless, and abdicated for the second and final time. He surrendered to the British.
Who chose the most remote place they could find for his final exile? The island of Saint Helena in the middle of the South Atlantic.
He was housed at Longwood House, which by all accounts was dilapidated, damp, windswept, and rat-infested.
A constant source of complaint. But even there, he maintained this strict imperial formality.
A psychological denial of his situation. He spent his final years dictating his memoirs, which was a critical part of shaping his own legacy.
He died there on May 5th, 1821, at the age of 51. The official cause was stomach cancer.
The same disease that killed his father. And while there's been some debate about arsenic poisoning, modern analysis has largely reaffirmed the original conclusion.
He was initially buried on the island, but in 1840 his remains were returned to France.
To a grand state funeral in Paris. His body was found to be remarkably well preserved. He was finally reinterred in that massive sarcophagus at Les Invalides in 1861.
So now let's turn to that immense lasting influence. Let's move away from the military campaigns to the administrative and legal reforms.
Well, after the coup, he rapidly centralized the state. He established the Council of State to draft laws, and most importantly, the system of prefects.
These were centrally appointed officials running the regional departments.
Yes, and their job was to ensure that central government priorities, tax collection, law and order, military conscription, were carried out uniformly across the whole country.
A system that's still foundational to French administration.
But his single most profound and lasting reform is, without a doubt, the Napoleonic Code.
Implemented in 1804. And this wasn't just a legal document, it was a revolution in legal thinking.
It replaced the confusing patchwork of old regional laws with one clear, accessible national set of laws. And Napoleon himself was actively involved. He attended dozens of the sessions to revise the drafts.
And the code cemented the core liberal values of the revolution, didn't it? Equality before the law, secure property rights.
Absolutely. It was so effective and rational that it was spread across Europe by his armies and continues to influence legal systems all over the world. Louisiana, Quebec, much of Latin America.
But it also enshrined some of his more conservative views.
It did. It actually reduced the civil rights of women, making them legally subservient to their husbands and fathers, a clear reflection of his personal views.
Beyond law, he also reformed the system of public honors.
The Legion of Honor in 1802. It was designed to recognize distinguished service, military or civilian, based on merit, not birth. It's still the highest French decoration.
And his educational reforms were just as important for building the modern state.
He created the elite secondary schools, the lycées, and specialized institutions, the Grande École, to produce the efficient bureaucrats and military officers he needed.
It was a very utilitarian system designed for a specific purpose.
It was. Now, when it comes to religion, his approach was famously pragmatic.
Utilitarian, really. He saw it as a tool for social order. He once said if he were governing Jews, he'd rebuild the Temple of Solomon.
That sums it up perfectly. And that view drove the Concordat of 1801. It brought the church back into the fold, but also tied it to the state by paying clerical salaries.
But that stability only lasted as long as the church was loyal to him.
Exactly. When Pope Pius VII resisted him, Napoleon just annexed the Papal States and had the Pope arrested and exiled.
It was ruthless.
It was. But we also have to note the progressive side of his religious policies. He promoted equality for Protestants and Jews, abolished ghettos, and ended the Spanish Inquisition where he could.
So again, we come back to this dual nature of the man. The sources paint a picture of undeniable genius, an incredible memory, a superior organizer.
Wellington himself said Napoleon's presence on the battlefield was worth 40,000 extra soldiers.
An unparalleled level of personal influence. But the counterbalance to that is the documented ruthlessness.
The censorship, the execution of plotters, the mass execution of prisoners at Jaffa, the heavy exploitation of conquered territories.
He crushed Republican institutions and restored a monarchy, but spread revolutionary ideals wherever he went.
It's a massive contradiction.
So the debate remains. Was he an enlightened despot who laid the foundation for modern Europe, or a megalomaniac who wrought greater misery than almost anyone before him?
And you can't ignore the devastation. The wars cost an estimated 6 million lives. He was this incredible force of both creation and destruction. So to synthesize all that, you have this figure who successfully spreads the core values of the revolution: equality, codified law, the end of feudalism across Europe. But at the same time, he restricts civil rights, he restores slavery, he brings back a hereditary monarchy, and he causes these wars that result in the staggering loss of 6 million lives.
His legacy is just this inseparable combination of creation and destruction, reform and authority.
It really is.
And that complexity leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to consider, and it comes directly from his final years. Even in exile on Saint Helena, he was relentlessly dictating his memoirs.
Building his own legend.
Precisely. This effort created the Memorial of Saint Helena, this hugely influential narrative that portrayed him as a liberal visionary, a proponent of a unified Europe who was only stopped by the old reactionary monarchies.
And this self-generated legend was so powerful, so successful, that it fundamentally shaped French politics for decades, and even paved the way for his nephew, Napoleon III, to come to power.
So what does that tell you about the enduring power of a carefully constructed historical narrative, even one crafted on a remote, rat-infested island? It's a potent lesson in how history can be shaped and controlled.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us for this in-depth examination.